Okay, cool. So let's look at the files here real quick. So I'm just going to call mine U7. Name yours whatever is fine. If you get the chapter numbers, do like CH9, I guess is what we're doing today, or if you want to do U7 instead. I think the chapter numbers are just confusing and confounding me, so I'm going to maybe switch over here. What else did I think of that I forgot? Oh yeah, I didn't put up a submission folder for this. Somebody will remind me when the demo's over. I need to make a submission folder for you guys so you can actually turn this in. Okay, so here's the resources that I just downloaded. Let me go ahead and crack that open. And actually, as you guys probably know, don't even need to do that on Windows. I can just hop in there and then drag files out of there. Anyway, here's the resources, and don't worry about this. Is like the Mac OS. Don't worry about that. That's weird Mac stuff. Just head into resources, and you can ignore the DS store as well. It's another Mac thing. I'm just going to grab the logo.png and then the 3 images that end with -220. And I'm going to either copy and paste or cut and paste those into the images folder. So let me go ahead and do that. I think I can just Control-C and just pop right in here, go into images and paste them. Yep, there we go. So these are just slightly bigger, which will help us. If you have something that small, then it's kind of difficult to demonstrate a responsive image when there's really nowhere it can go. So like here is the 75 pixel Sorkin, little itty bitty thing, and then here's the 220, same dude, real dude as it turns out. And then same thing with Tubin, so here's a little tiny Tubin 75, and then here's the Tubin 220, and so on and so forth. So we'll get those guys in there, and then also the logo, wherever it is. So I found a larger version of the logo online. Here is the little itty bitty thing that we've been dealing with, which I think is 80 pixels wide. This guy's significantly larger, so we'll have a little bit more wiggle room working with this. So that's probably the first thing we're going to do is get those files replaced out. So let's go ahead and switch those out. I'm going to pop over to my coding environment here. Let's get this close too. And I'm going to open up a folder. U7, Dispo U7. There we go, select folder. And then here's the index.html that we started with. So let me go ahead and go live here. It took a second for that to show up. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so this is what we wound up with. This is basically a mobile view, right? If this screen got much wider, then this would start to look very lonely in the middle of the page. Only when we bring it in to something like this that looks a little bit more handheld, well, all of a sudden things make sense. The only thing that's really not working right now is I forgot to put a margin top and bottom on this kind of designed block quote that we did. So we will check that out as well, if I remember. For some reason, this Windows seems to be so difficult to grab the edge of this thing. Is this a Windows thing, or is it just me? Yeah, okay, let's do that. Sheesh. All right, HTML. So first thing I want to do is change out the logo image, and that is actually in the CSS, not in the HTML, right? Because we put it as a background image in the CSS on this header element. So if we open up styles and then open up main.css and then go to the header, I've got a lot of comments on mine. You probably don't have this many, and that's perfectly fine. This is just kind of to show, yeah, we can do all this stuff, or we could do shorthand here. So here's the logo.gif, and I tried to name it the same thing, except that I gave it a .png extension instead. So just delete the GIF from logo.gif and type in PNG and save it. And when we go to the browser, it's going to be too big, right? Because it's showing this at the default size, to the actual size the image is. Fortunately for us, And you can see it's not a very good quality image. It's just a little bit better than the one we were using. I couldn't find a truly good image of this logo. There is a background size property that we'll use in order to get this scrunched back down to the size of the other one. But now, because it's a larger image, we'll be able to scale it up if we want to for wider screens. So you can't put this into the background property. You've got to put this as a different property. So after the background property closes here, it's got the two backgrounds, right? It's got the image with the repeat and the position, and then it's got the background color here as well. They're separated by a comma. Now we need a new property.
Yeah, it looks like 150 pixels should work. Somewhere around there, 120 to 150.
Well, let's see. The original image, if I pop back over to images here, the logo.gif, I think we decided was 80 pixels wide. So that's what I'm going to start with and see if there's extra room, then we'll make it bigger than that. So the property is background size. And as almost always the case, you use the hyphen to separate the two words, background size. And then I'll just put 80 pixels. If you put one value, it should apply to both the height and the width. Really, the width is what it's looking at. And whoops, wrong window. There we go. So it sizes it down. That's 80 pixels. So yeah, if you decide to make it a little bit bigger, I don't know. Let's see what 90 pixels look like. Yeah, it's a little too big. That's kind of getting close to the text here. So maybe somewhere in between, 85, something like that. Whoops, what did I just do? Thank goodness for Control Z, right? There we go. I'll go ahead and start with 85 pixels. So that's a background size property. Just remember that has to go in a different property than just the background shorthand that we're using here. However, let's say we had two. Right now we've got an image and a color here, right, for the two backgrounds. But you could have more than one image here. Instead of an image and a background, you could have multiple actual images with URLs. And if that were the case, then you could actually do two different background sizes here too. Do it the same way, separate them by a comma, and they will apply in order as the background images are specified in the background property. That won't work for us. We only have the one image. So I'm just showing you that is a possibility. It works. Okay, so there we go. So now it's sized up, and let's go ahead and now we got to go back to the HTML because the other images are actually placed in as HTML. So what's the difference? I think we mentioned this before, but let's talk about it again real quick because we've got the logo in there as a background image in the CSS. These other images we put in the HTML. What's the difference? Why do we use those two different techniques? It's because these guys are considered to be content. The images are content just like the text is content. I want Google to be able to do a search for Mr. Toobin, Jeffrey Toobin, and if someone looks for it under images, an image search, then they should be able to come up with those images. Basically, if you want something to be content that's searchable and selectable and archivable, then put it in your content, which means putting it in the HTML. If it's a formatting thing, then you put it in the CSS as a background instead, and that's what's happening up here for the logo. This is the actual content right here, and the logo is like a representation of this content. So it's almost never, despite what the textbook does, it's almost never put into an actual HTML page as part of the content. So anyway, that's why those guys. So these guys here, just change the 75 to, what did I call these? I always put hyphens in.
220.
Well, 220. Yeah, 220. That's right. So hyphen 220 for each of those. So hyphen 220. And of course, if you want, you can copy and paste that. In the case of, I was almost saying I almost always use hyphens here, but this is one case where I haven't really codified what I do after all this time. Sometimes if it's just a numbering at the end, I will do like the textbook does, but often I'll do this instead. It's totally up to you. Okay, so this is going to break some things, I think. When I save this and go back to the browser and scroll down here, yeah, you see we've got larger images and it's pushing its way out of the whole thing. Look, why is that happening? It's like putting itself over the footer, and look, it's pushing the text of the footer out of the way. What's going on here? It's because we floated these guys. Remember that floats are a little bit troublesome to deal with sometimes. And what floats do, like floats, they're not really part of the regular content flow anymore. That's not quite true, but you're kind of taking them out of the normal content flow, and then things flow around them. Like before we had these guys stacked next to each other when we first put the floats on, and we only got them to stack vertically when we took the figure in which they're nested and applied a clear left on there, just which tells it to ignore any floats that happened before, any left floats. But the rest of this, like the footer, has no such instruction. So there's a few things that you could do to fix this, and I'll show you one way and then another way and then a combination of ways. So you can hold off for right now if you want to, but one way to get this to stop from doing this is to take the footer and give it a clear left the same way that the figures had. Let me go ahead and try it here. So in my CSS here, let's see, there's a footer down here somewhere. This is main and footer section. There's my footer. Let me just try it. I'm just going to try doing a clear left on here. And I go back over here and see that fixes it. So that's one way to do it. Let me comment that out here. Another way to do it is to tell the figure to always have the same height as the content that it contains. And that is actually this is one of those things like margin zero auto that I'm not 100% sure whether it's a feature or a bug. But a way to do that, let's see, where's the figure? Yeah, that's right, figures, down at the bottom here. So figure, clear left, let's put this guy right here, overflow. And overflow is a fun property where you can control, like let's say that you've got a small tight box and just a little bit of text in it, and the text keeps wrapping on 2 lines and you don't want to do that. Then you can use the overflow property in order to fix that. And you can look up on MDN or whatever all the different possible values for this, but I'm just going to do overflow hidden, which is one of those things that intuitively I would never guess that this would work. But if I go over here, then you'll see, remember I took the clear left off of the footer before this. So let me show you. I'm going to take this line here and it's broken. I put in overflow hidden on the figure and it fixes it. And it fixes it, not only does it fix it, but it adds the amount of padding that I would expect here to see that we've got like up on the top as well. So that's actually my preferred fix for this. Although either one works, they are slightly different from each other. So I would go ahead and go down to the figure and put overflow hidden as a new property or new declaration on there. Now, another thing that might sort of fix it, instead of doing either of those things, is simply to go to the figure image and make it smaller again. Make it like, do a width on it that will make it small enough so that it doesn't, jump down and crash over the footer like that. But that's not a great solution on its own because we're going to want to change these and make them larger at some point. But I am going to make them smaller to begin with. If I'm looking at this at mobile size here, like so, like I feel like those images are a little too big for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give them a max width. So let's see, where do I want to put that? Probably right here. Max width. And the original images are 75 pixels wide. I think that's a little too small. And okay, I'm going to make them about twice that big, I think. Maybe 140, 150 pixels, something like that. Okay, so yeah, and remember what I'm doing is I'm doing max width instead of width. This is a responsive design thing, so it allows for fluid size on those images. Let me make it a little bigger just to show you. Max width, let's say I do 160 pixels instead. Remember the images themselves are 220. God, it's almost impossible for me to get that double arrow. Is this an edge thing? Do you guys know? Am I going crazy? It's almost impossible to grab that and resize it. Okay, well this is I would have to make it too large, but basically the idea behind having a max width is if the wind, if this gets narrow enough, then you know what? Let's do this properly. So here, since we're getting started on responsive design, let's do two things. We'll do a width and we'll do a max width of 160 pixels. So right above max width, I'm going to do a width that is going to be like a percentage. So let's say, I don't know, it looks about like, say 40%. So what you can do is you can use these in conjunction with each other. So the width 40, when you put something with a width of a percentage, then what it means is it's going to be flexible. It can change in size depending on the width of its container. So let me try that by itself just to show you what happens here. So there it is at 40%. And when I resize the browser window here, you can see that it changes width. So what you can do is you can make it so that it is a percentage and it's fluid, but then give like a limit on how wide it's allowed to get, because after that, like the image won't look good anymore. So there it is. I think you saw they collapsed down in size just a touch to 160 pixels. Oh, for goodness sake, come on. Yeah. And then when we get smaller than that, it's only got a little wiggle room in this case, but it's allowed to resize a little bit at small size, but then it's got that cap. It never gets wider than 160 pixels. So this here is a fundamental like responsive design technique of giving something a percentage width and then give it a max width if necessary so that it doesn't grow beyond a certain amount. So that's jumping forward just a little bit because I wanted to get those images in there. Did anybody need help getting the images in there, or is anybody falling behind on doing that with the CSS or anything? Because I'm about to jump off into the deep end with Flexbox here.
Nope, all set.
Everybody good? All right.
Yes, sir.
I will take you guys at your word. So,
hey, Mr. Bispo,
yes.
I'm able to see the colors for like the background. For some reason, my colors, I got all mixed up.
Let's see, for what element? Like the HTML or the body?
The body, I believe.
Okay, so this is the linear gradient that we put into the HTML. The body just has a background of white on it.
I actually, and I don't know if this is the same problem you're running into, but I ran into an issue with the gradient where for whatever reason it like expanded the footer area and then gave no actual gradient behind the body itself. And when I took out the max width property and then put it back in, it fixed it. It was like the weirdest thing. I think it was something with the preview.
Wow, that sounds a bit buggy. Was that previewing in the coding environment or in the browser?
In the coding environment.
Okay.
And the browser, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well just be the tools, the extensions that I'm using, but.
Well, if you can replicate the problem in lab, I'd love to see it. That sounds interesting.
Well, it looks like it might have just come back. So let me, here, I'll share my screen real quick if you want to see it.
All right, hang on a second. All right, you can go ahead.
I hate it when it does this. Hang on. For some reason, it never lets me pick my main monitor in this stupid Google Meet.
You mean this wonderful Google Meet, don't you?
Yeah. And then when I moved the monitor, it fixed it. So never mind. Okay. So essentially what it's doing is it's taking like, it'll take like the bottom, 20% of the screen, and it'll make it the top end of the gradient color here, and then push my footer up. And it's the weirdest thing, and I don't know why it does it, but.
Okay, I'm not too surprised by the former, but I am a little surprised that it's pushing your footer around.
Yeah.
So, all right.
But then literally like what'll happen is like I'll just take out the max width property and put it back in and it'll fix it. Or I guess now if I just move to a different monitor, it'll fix it. I don't know. It's stupid. But anyways.
Weird. Okay. The
Hey,
weird
Mr.
computer
Bispo, do you
guy.
change the logo image as well, or
Yeah,
just the person?
I changed the logo image. That was done in the CSS though. So let me pop back over here. So in the CSS now, let's see, what do we put for the header? So all you have to do is change like logo.gif to logo.png. Those are probably more common at this point anyway. And then we had to do the background size in order to make it fit. So I guess it was those two things. Okay, I'm going to plunge ahead here. We're heading for the HTML, and to really show Flexbox off, I think that what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a navigation here, even though we don't have any other pages to go to, other than, I guess, the speakers. But let's go ahead and add that. Then we'll have a nice, tidy set of links that we can use as a group and apply them. Like we want those to go in a row sideways, or we want them to go vertically, or we want to change the order of these, and so on. This is all stuff you can do in Flexbox. So what I'm going to do is in between header and main, I'm going to go ahead and put the nav here. Now, just as an aside, it used to be that we would always put the nav down at the bottom, like right before the footer. Why? Well, it was an SEO thing. It was considered that search engine optimization, and this is still generally true as far as I know, the bots will give more weight to the content that's up at the top. So that's why you want like the site ID all the way up at the very top, and you want to have like a page name somewhere near the top and so on. And so we would always try to cram the nav down here because that's not really important content, right? That's just how you get from page to page. It's your wayfinding. But the word for the past at least decade or so now, I think, is that bots are now smart enough to know what a navigation element is and to skip back past it and not grant it extra weight, SEO weight that you don't want it to have. So it's now perfectly okay to put the nav in the place where you expect it to appear the most often. Now, as you'll see, like the very first thing we're going to do is take this nav and use CSS to put it somewhere else on the page. But that's just because we don't yet have the JavaScript tools in order to create a pancake stack navigation and hide this thing away the way that we're going to probably next week, I guess. So anyway, that's just an aside. There is a semantic structural element for navigation. It's called nav. It's got kind of the same weight as header and main and footer and section and so on. And for these, we've done some links before, right? So we have like ahref equals, and then this is the hyperreference value. It's going to this page, and then the text content that's clickable, it's hyper, and then you have to close the anchor tag after it. So I'm going to do that here as well, and we're just going to, well, the first one is an existing page. So index.html is almost always going to be the first link in your navigation. Usually it says home instead of index, because index here, the only people who are going to understand that are coders. People who are non-coders are going to scratch their head and say, index? What page is the index? I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, literally. We tend to forget that as developers. We know what an index is, but no one else does. And that's most people. So, home. But most of the other time, you want the text to match the file name that you're going for. That's another SEO thing that's kind of important. So let's see, the one the textbook uses in at least one of the examples, we've got speakers, as you might expect. And so text matches the reference attribute. And then ahref equals luncheon for some reason. It must be content in one of the other chapters that I haven't done yet. Sorry, this autocomplete is killing me. And we'll do 2 more. We'll have href equals, and what is it? Tickets. .html. That's one thing that I forget about a lot, is that you actually have to include the file name extension here. So luncheon.html. Fortunately, I always catch myself when I test the links on each page. And then finally is about us. Now the textbook does about us. The SEO guy in me, which I haven't done it for a long time, but it was one of my early gigs in the web, was doing SEO. I was back in the wild, wild west when hardly anybody knew what SEO was even, let alone how it worked. I was very fortunate to have bumped into someone who did SEO for a living, and so I took him into the local, brew pub and plied him with beers and got him to tell me. He probably gave me a couple $1,000s worth of information over the course of an hour or two, and it got me launched onto what wound up being a career for a little while, a few years or so. Like I said, that was when nobody knew hardly what SEO was. Companies, man, they would, if you knew anything about it, they would pay you so much money. It was ridiculous. I guess this is in the early double aughts, like 2003 or something like that. And I remember getting paid $600 for something that took me 2 hours to finish. Like, it wasn't like I didn't even do the SEO for them. I just advised them on it. I was a consultant for 2 hours. I wrote up a little report and they paid me $600 for it. It was ridiculous. So that doesn't happen anymore. Anyway, that was another little tangent. Anyway, the SEO guy in me wants to split those up because about us as 2 different words is easier for a machine system to read than about us as 1 word. I'm sure they could figure it out with something that simple. But generally speaking, I think when you have more than 1 word, you want to split it up by hyphens like that. That does not go for domain names necessarily, because domain names, people don't really like typing hyphens, although I'm seeing more and more of them these days, I have to admit. So usually in the past I have done like no hyphens for a domain name, but once you get into the actual page names and folder names and so on, use hyphens to, as a separator for words. So anyway, about us, whatever, something like that. On save. So this is your navigation structure. Very simple, right? It's a nav element with a bunch of hyperlinks in it. There are no block level text elements here, so there's no paragraphs around these anchors or anything like that. You don't really need them. Now, having said that, while you guys are typing this, if you still are, I'm going to duplicate this whole thing and show you what the textbook does and what I used to do, and then tell you why I no longer do it this way. And you need to see this because you are going to see it. You're going to see this all over the place. You will see the navigation list as an unordered list, a UL. And within the UL, you will have list items containing these guys here. So let me just grab, this is only take a moment here. Paste these guys in. You guys do not need to do this unless you're interested. In any case, it'll be on the recording, so you can do it anytime you want. Oh wait, that was a copy, so let me get rid of that. There we go, cut and paste. Oh, that's right, I was going to try to start typing a little lighter, wasn't I? Let's see if I can manage it here. Okay. So.
Do you, my friend, do you.
What's that?
I said, do you, my friend, do you.
Yeah, rock your style, right?
Whatever works. I'll tell you what, I had to slow down because I was doing something or another, and I pushed down a key so hard that it flung off my keyboard. And I had to, like, it sprung off the keyboard, and so I had to like remind myself to stop being so rough on my keyboard. And ever since then,
that's some good feedback from your machine there.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's 2 different styles of doing the nav element. And let me just save this and we'll just pop over to the browser here and check it out. And so here is the first one. It's just kind of throwing everything together because, again, they're not in block level text elements like paragraphs. They're not going to be on different lines. But then here, they are on different lines because they're in LIs list items of an unordered list. They don't have bullet points because somewhere else in the CSS I already took the bullet points off because of this guy here. So that's what those guys look. So, and this structurally, it makes perfect sense to do because it is a list of things, right? It's a list of links. Logically, there's no problem with this whatsoever. And there are some things that are become easier, decidedly easier in the CSS when you do it this way. So for instance, you can have a nested UL. You can have a UL inside of a UL with its own list items. And that's a great way to do like a submenu from one of the menus. So like if we, if you like hover over one of these and then it drops down another list from there. That's what I mean by a submenu. And that becomes a bit easier to deal with when you've got nested lists instead of just having kind of these floating anchors out here. So why don't I do it this way anymore? Accessibility. I read in several places that I trusted that this is a problem for screen readers. Screen readers being that thing that's built into Edge, which I keep hitting the shortcut for on accident, where it will read the page aloud for people who are visually impaired. And if you have a list of items here, it slows that process way down because for each one of them, it has to say list item number 1, link, and then it'll tell you what the text of the link is. And then it'll say list item number 2, link. And it says it a lot slower than I'm doing right now, right? So instead of just giving them, links and then telling them what each one is, it has to read through that whole thing. And I guess it's very off-putting, which is understandable. So once I started reading about that, despite the fact that I did this for so long, it was really hard for me to give this up. But I now do it like this instead. And, I've come to embrace it. I appreciate change. So I am going to comment this guy out.
So what you're saying is that if you don't want your website canceled by blind people, then you should probably.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not an issue, then I don't think there's a problem with it, right? But most websites, you will have a significant portion of your audience show up who are visually impaired in some way. And visual impairment is a much larger field than just completely legally blind, right? There's color blindness, there's partial, like needing reading glasses, whatever. So it's just one of those things that you consider. If you start doing a deep dive into web development, sooner or later you're going to start tripping more over this whole accessibility thing. Like what colors are okay to use? How much contrast do you need between text and ground? How much contrast do you need on the link color? Things like that. How much size difference do you need between headings? This is all accessibility stuff. And there's some more coding stuff that goes with accessibility too, like using ARIA rules and so on. It's kind of a deep dive into that, so we're not really getting into that, but this is one of those things that's why I started doing this. It's better for accessibility. Okay, enough said. So here is my new short and sweet nav element, and there it is. I've commented out the other one, so it's not appearing. You can just do this guy right here.
Okay, so now that looks like poo-poo.
Yeah, it does.
Can you center it and distribute it?
Wait, you don't think this looks great?
Nah.
Sometimes you don't notice an error until you look at it in the browser. I've got two luncheons here.
Yeah.
Luncheon, and I think I was supposed to type tickets here. There
just
we go.
a text align, a little bit of padding makes it look better. Just center it up.
Oh, all right. I guess we can. If you
A
really
little
want.
0.5,
Let's do it. Let's make it look a little better. So
I already did it. It was driving me crazy.
I'm going to make a whole new section down at the bottom here. In fact, let's go ahead and make 2 comments down. Well, you don't have to. If you like I told you guys, you can organize it however your CSS however you want to, as long as it's organized and clear. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an extra comment for Flexbox. This is general Flexbox stuff we're doing down here, and then we'll start by doing nav stuff. So that's kind of how I do my comments. So yeah, let's go ahead and start by formatting the nav. I'm going to start with the background. And in fact, this might be the only thing we put right on the nav element. I figured out an RGB value for this. And it is not quite as dark as this guy, but not quite as light. It's like somewhere in the middle of this gradient. is what I wound up dropping. So it's 150, 134, and 143, like so. And there we go. So there's that background color. It's not quite as dark as this guy right here. And for the rest of it, let's go ahead and tackle the anchors that are inside nav. I think this is the only thing we need on nav, at least for right now. So there's a lesson coming up about specificity. I think you guys have heard me use that term before. I want to select for these anchors. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color so that they're either white or maybe this lighter violet or something like that, so they actually stand out against this darker background. And I need to select for those and not these other links. And the way that I do that is with a compound selector. I'm going to select for the anchors that are specifically inside the nav element. And the way I do that is just by doing nav space A, right? So this in CSS talk, this means select for the anchors that are inside nav. And let's start with color white and see if that's too obnoxious. Save. Why is that not working? Does anyone have an idea?
We have the URLs are set for the hover color, right?
You're on the right track. Almost.
So the A-link color.
Yes. So remember what we did up here, instead of just doing A, we did A link and A visited. These are more specific selectors than just A by itself would be. This is selecting for a specific state of the anchor. So in order to override these, I need another one that's as specific. I need another selector. So I need to actually do A link and A visited here and not just A link. So let's do that. I'm going to do nav A. I still need the nav there. So nav A colon link, comma, nav A colon visited. So that's something that you'll bump up into a lot. If you start using like those pseudo selectors, and then you try to override them using just a regular selector, a regular tag selector, it's not going to work. It needs to be that specific. So now when we save and go over here, now it's working. Let me see if I like that better or if I like that lighter violet better. Let's see, this is RGB, and it is this guy right here, 225, 220, 223. No, I mean, visually I like it better because it's not as obnoxious, but I don't think it looks enough like links that way. I'm going to go back to the white. You can use whichever one you like better. Yeah, that looks more like links.
Wheat actually doesn't do too bad either.
What's that?
Wheat.
Wheat?
The wheat color.
Is there a wheat color?
Yes.
Like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not enough. Ugh. Yeah, hideous. There we go.
Whiz, I appreciate your humility in that one. Thanks.
Last time I listened to your advice, that was terrible.
Cody, mute yourself.
Was that just the pot calling the kettle black?
Cody, I said mute yourself.
Listen, we have an instruction going here, and I don't think you should challenge me because I will waste everybody's time for 20 minutes fighting back and forth with you.
Wouldn't be the first time, would it? Okay, all right, let's go. How do we center this now?
All right. Now, okay, so I'm going to do some other stuff to nav, but I'm not going to use the same selector. And I think you've seen why, because whenever we use this selector, it has high specificity to it. So whenever possible, I'm not going to use it. I kind of broke that here a little bit by putting tech. No, actually, that's the right way. A-link and A-visit. Okay. But anyway, just so I don't wind up having the trouble in the future, I'm going to say, okay, so these A-link and A-visited things, I'm only going to use those for the color because I needed to. And the rest of the stuff, I'm just going to use nav A for. Nothing wrong with that. You can repeat selectors as much as you want to, right? As much as you need to. If there's any conflict, then whichever rule happens last will override whatever happens first. But other than that, I mean, just whatever's in the code, the flow of the code. Okay, so let's get some padding on these guys because they're driving everyone nuts here. So this is on the anchors, and I have decided that 0.5 Ms and 3M, that's what I want to do. Yeah, I guess so. So 3M, because the rest of the content is pushed away from the left side by 3Ms, and then 0.5 Ms is for top and bottom. So let's just see what this does. And this knocks everything. This is breaking everything some more. It's putting things onto 2 lines and so on. That's okay. We're going to use Flexbox here in just a minute. In fact, let's go ahead and do it right now. So some of the properties on Flexbox that I'm going to show you guys is, well, the first one is display property. I think I mentioned that to you before. You can do like display inline, display block. You can do display none to make something disappear from the page altogether without removing from the HTML. And one of the newer values that you can put on there is display flex. So let's go ahead and do that onto the nav element here, because this is the parent container, right? The anchors are nested directly inside nav. So if I want them to go vertically or horizontally, then I'm going to do display flex on the parent element here. That's something the CSS tricks page is going to make clear. So I'll put it right up here under nav. Let's do display flex. And let's just do that just by itself, and we'll test it and go over here and refresh. And what it's doing is it's throwing everything next to each other. Now, why are they so far away from each other? Well, because we put that padding on there of 3Ms. That's what's pushing them so far away. But by default, the flex direction is going to be a row instead of a column. And by default, there's a flex wrap property that you can do either wrap or no wrap. And wrap simply means if there's room, if there's too much stuff, it'll wrap down onto the next line, kind of like the paragraph text wraps, right? This is no wrap. Because otherwise, if it were on wrap, then this about us, and probably the tickets would be pushed down to the next line, just like it was before we added the CSS Flexbox. So I think for mobile view, we want to get these guys vertical here instead of running across the page. Remember, we're talking about like a skinny window here. Come on. It's not going to let me do it. There we go. So skinny window, we probably do not want those guys floating next to each other like that. So
I made an X on this right here, and it actually worked out. I did padding 4%, and it actually went out, and I moved it back and forth, and it actually like worked. I don't know what.
That'll definitely work. That's a good idea. So yeah, if we try that out, if we do 4% here. Remember, percentage is the way of making things responsive. So if I do that, then yeah, and it will probably size pretty well down to a, look at this, you see the about us on my screen, it's getting pushed down on the 2 lines there. So I'm starting to run into some problems at these very narrow sizes, around what, 300 pixels or something like that. So let me go back to this guy here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the direction of the flex box. I'm going to change the flex from row to column so it shows vertically. And again, we put that onto the parent element, which is the nav here. And it's going to be flex direction, column, instead of row. Save that, and oh my, there we go.
That's ugly.
I like it. Let's do, let's see, I'm going to do nav A. Let's get, we need to get a line between these guys here to separate them out because it's just one big blah right now. And so I'm going to show you a new compound selector that I don't think we've done yet. If I want just white lines in between these guys, but not one, on top of the top one, and not one at the end here, then what I'll do is I'll select for every anchor. I'm going to select for these 4 anchors, but not this one, and put a border top on each one. And the way that I do that is with a plus operator, which basically says take every anchor that is preceded by another anchor and then select for that. But it won't select for this one because there's no anchor in front of this one. Let me show you how it looks. We'll do a no selector down here, and we're going to do nav A plus A, like this. Nav A plus A means every anchor that is preceded by nav A, which is, again, it's going to be those last 4, but not the first one. Let's do a border top, and I'm just going to do thin solid. And that will separate those guys out. And this is where I'm starting to maybe think, you know what, those lines there are kind of, like, I don't mind the white for the link color, but these are getting kind of distracting here, these lines. So here's where you can override that and use that, maybe that light violet color will be better for this. So I'll go back to doing RGB, 225, 220, 223. Yeah, that looks a little bit better than the white. You could also try going darker with it instead of using that light color. And use, come on, you're not going to give me a drop down? Give me a drop down, thank you. Like our original darker violet, you could go that direction with it instead. That maybe looks a little bit better. I don't know. Whatever looks good to you. Now I want to point out, this is not what you would want to see, right? When you come to a mobile site, you do not want to see a bunch of navigation up at the top, like this. Everyone's just going to immediately scroll past it to try to get to the content. What we are eventually going to do next week is we're going to have a little pancake stack button up here in which we are going to hide this whole thing, and then when the user taps on that, it'll drop down for them. And then they can make a selection, and when they do, it'll, you know, tidily go back into that little icon again. But for now, we don't have the JavaScript yet to do that, so that's why the navigation is just sitting out here. But we still don't want this up on top of the page like this. We want this at the bottom of the page. I don't want to move it in the HTML. I don't want to go to the HTML and take the nav element and plunk it down here on top of the footer because, like I said, eventually we're going to want this back up here again. So we are going to change the order of these guys in CSS. Didn't used to be able to do this. This is fun. All right, there we go. Let's check it out. So in order to do this, I am going to apply flex display to the body element itself. Let's take a look at the HTML really quick. The nav, the header, the main, and the footer are all direct children of the body element, right? If I go ahead and scroll all the way up, we can see those are all on the same level. The indenting is consistent, I think it is. So yeah, those four structural elements, header, nav, main, and footer. What I want to do is I want to take this nav and I want to, in the CSS, move it down here so it's in between main and footer. Users are at least somewhat familiar on mobile, like handheld devices. If they don't see a nav, they'll swipe up real quick to see if it's down at the bottom of the page. And so barring some better solution with JavaScript, that's where you want to put this thing. So that's what we're going to do. So CSS, we're not touching the HTML now. I'm going to keep, even though this is the body selector, I'm still keeping it in nav because this is stuff we're doing like for the purpose of the navigation. So I'll select for body here. Notice that I've got another body selector up here, right? This is one of the first things that we did is we put in this body selector. It's perfectly okay to have another body selector down somewhere further down on the page. It's not a problem at all. As long as it makes sense for, you know, the organization of your CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and on the body selector now, I'm going to do a display flex. And let's see what happens here. Oh my goodness. I don't know about you guys. I like this page. I think it's nice and readable. Ugh. So remember, Flexbox by default is a row and it does not wrap. So, or does it, you know what? No, I'm not sure. But in any case, it's like smashing everything sideways here, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to have to go ahead and do the flex direction, just like we did for nav, column. And once we do that, it looks exactly like it did before we added Flexbox. So why are we doing this? Well, we need to do this as a preliminary step in order to move the nav down there. To change the order of these elements, these structural elements, the parent element needs to have flex applied to it as a display. Otherwise, the ordering won't work. So that's why sometimes you would apply a display flex, give it a direction, and those two things together might result in something that looks exactly the way it did before you put the flex on there, but you still need it anyway so that you can put some properties to the children elements as well. And that's what we're going to do down here now. on the nav, I am going to do order. I always want to do flex order, but it's just order. And I'm going to start with 0. Now 0 is, so this always gets an integer in there, right? 0 is the default. So if I do order 0, it's not going to do anything. Right? So if I refresh over here, it's in the same place. By default, all these elements have an order 0 on them. So if I do order 0, it's just reaffirming that. So let's try doing order -1. See what happens now. I'm expecting that that will take the nav and put it up above the header. So save that and refresh, and there it is. Look at that. We're changing the order of our content on the page using only CSS. I can't tell you guys how cool this is. In order to understand that, you'd have to go back 15 years when we couldn't do something like this without JavaScript. Now let's go ahead and make that a positive integer. Let's do order 1 instead of order -1. Remember, 0 is the default. So let's see what happens when I do order 1. I'm going to save this, and you might expect this to do what we wanted, like take the navigation and put it down below the main but above the footer. But what happens is that
footer has a 0 value already, so
yes, good. Yes, exactly. All these elements have 0. Header has 0, main has 0, and footer has 0. So anything with 1 goes after all of those. Yes, good, exactly. So what we have to do here is we need to make, we need to do that like order 1, we need to do it to the nav and the footer in order to push both of those down. So let's do that. So let's see, this order 1, I'm going to get rid of this on the nav. Then I'm going to make a new selector up here for nav and footer. Compound selector with a comma means select for both of those things. And then do the order 1. Save, and booyah! There we go. So we just threw it down out of the way on small screens. It's tucked safely out of the way. Anyone who's really interested will probably swipe down to find it down there, and it'll be there. But like I said, we have a better solution for this later on. And there's your code for doing it. First, you have to do the display flex and flex direction on the parent element here. And then you have to do the order 1 on the nav element that you want to move and anything following it that you also want to move. And it winds up looking like this.
couldn't you also set like your footer to like 99 or 100 and then everything else would be, and just make it static? Or, I mean,
Yeah, I assume you could do that too.
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding. Okay, so if you said order 1, it's because the menu already has it's still in that order of the like the original home or the links, then all the other content, and footer was automatically last, so it's just adding a. I guess I don't understand why order 1 pushed them down into our correct order.
Just think of all of the other elements as having 0. So,
right.
Yeah, 0, 0, and then anything you give 1 will get pushed down underneath that. So
But
before...
why didn't the footer go above the links if they're both 1 now?
Yeah, it
Or
did when we had this, it did, right?
Right.
But when we do give the order 1 to both of them, then, well, I guess they were in that order when they were both 0s, so they just keep that same order when they're both 1s.
Okay.
That's all. That's as well as I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah, you totally could. I mean, you could take out the footer here, and you could do like footer, and do like an order 99, and I would expect that the same thing would happen. It still works. So if you wanted to have them as different numbers, that makes more sense, then yeah, go ahead and do it that way too. I've had ones that I've done in the past. I can't think of exactly when, but when I had to like order, like give everything an order practically. Like all the siblings had to be like -1 or 3 or 4 or whatever. And sometimes you just wind up doing that. And that reminds me also, if it makes sense to do, then you can also do this. If you just want to apply this to everything, then you could do something like this, where, header, order 1, and then the next element is main, and give that an order 2. And that works as well. That does exactly the same thing. So if that makes more sense, then go ahead and do it like this instead.
What was that? What was that color that you used for the border on the navigation menu?
Let's see. It's this one here, 103.82.95. That's that dark violet that I've been using ever since we did the redesign.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to put these orders back, because this is the way that makes more sense to me. There we go. And boom, got it.
Would it make a difference if you did footer nav than nav footer, or is it the same thing?
Good question. It should be the same thing. Let's try it.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing too.
Let's see. Yep, same thing. I like these little experiments. That's how you learn. Okay, there's just one more thing that I want to do, and that is we're going to apply our first media query, which really is more of a Friday discussion, but we'll just go ahead and get started so you see what it looks like. So I think this works okay, not great, but okay for handheld nav, but out here, no. Not for tablet and not for desktop, certainly. Come on. There we go. Yeah, people on desktop would be like, wait, where's the nav? Okay, forget it. The site sucks. I'm leaving. Not the same thing as on handheld, where you might expect people to swipe down to look for the nav. So let's go ahead and get that fixed at least. So down here, I'm going to make another comment, and let's call this, what should we call this? I'm going to call this phone upper limit or something like that. So let me explain what I mean by this. And by the way, you should always do this. You should name your media queries if you can as part of your organization. So there's another site that I put into the useful links. There might be a couple here, but let me see. So useful links for blah, 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 blah. I just want to see it. There we go. And this is really, this is something that we're going to explore more in on Friday. But the 100% correct way to do CSS breakpoint. So what is a breakpoint? A breakpoint is a place that you specify where the design changes. So you can have it change, say like, yeah, whenever the viewport is 760 pixels wide or wider, then change to this other layout and do it again and again for these different widths. That's what breakpoints are, is where you have major changes to the design based on the viewport width. And on Friday, I'm going to be assigning this as supplemental reading. So if you want to, you can go ahead and dive into it. Don't worry about the Jurassic date here. It's still an excellent article. And there's so many people who get this wrong. And I was getting it wrong for so long. And then this is one of the articles I read that got me to change my mind about how it's being done. So this is all just as a preview and as a way of saying, for those of you who think, well, wait a minute, why aren't you doing a breakpoint at an actual device width that's in common usage, like, oh, I don't know, 768 pixels, or, 1024 pixels, or 1152 pixels, or something like that. This article explains why. So to start with, I'm just going to do one at 600 pixels, and I'm going to call that the widest phone limit. I know that there's some phones that are larger than that. Phablets, as they're called. I've got a phablet myself, but really I start to think of them as being kind of almost tablet based. So phone upper limit or something like that as a name. And here's what a media query looks like. Now, a very basic media query, and this existed even in CSS 2.1, at media. There's your media query. And then the original idea behind it is that you would just tell it what kind of device or presentation format it's going to be using. So for instance, you could do at media screen, which is what we do almost all the time. That's like a monitor here, right? A ski or a handheld screen, or whatever. You could also do like at media print or what have you. There are other ones too. I can't remember what they are because these are the only two I've ever used myself. But at media print or at media screen, I'll do screen. And then you treat this as if it's like a block for, CSS rules, except now you put other rules inside of here. So you do one indent level for this. Now at media screen, it doesn't do a whole lot for us by itself because it's already treating it as screen by default. And by the way, there used to be a handheld, at media handheld, but the vendors of devices, quite rightly, I think, rebelled against that and said, we want to be screen, which is the default. And so I think that was a good idea. But let's go ahead and put a filter on this. And the way you put a filter is by doing the AND operator and then a pair of parentheses. And you can specify a piece of CSS in here that the media query, that it has to meet that CSS query in order to run the code that's inside. So you guys know how Booleans will work, right? If it's yes, then we run the code inside here. If it's no, then you run on to the next thing. Same thing right here. So we're going to specify a piece of CSS that has to be met in order for the code inside to run. And the way that you do this most of the time in mobile first media queries, which is what I'm going to be asking and requesting and forcing you guys to do, is you do a min width. Remember, we've been using max width like on the images and so on, but we can set a min width here, and let's just set our first breakpoint at 600 px. Now you have to put in the px or else it doesn't work, or else it might give you like unexpected results. And let's just start by putting something really obnoxious in here, that just so we know what's going to work, right? So we're going to test and see if the media queries work. And so let's just take our splat selector, our universal selector, and just say color red, right? I think that's the very first thing we tested when we started doing a style sheet back in like unit 2. So, but now it's based on this condition here. So I'm going to save this and go over to the browser. Where is it? Here it is. There it is. All the text is red. And if it's working for you, then go ahead and bring in the width here. And then when it gets narrower than 600 pixels, then it should turn to the normal color. That's the color we specified in our CSS, wider than 600 pixels, and it turns red. Like we were saying before, CSS is constantly evaluated by the browser, so none of this stuff has to be refreshed or reloaded or anything like that. So the CSS is working for me. If yours is not doing this, let me know. We'll take a look at it now and get it fixed. That's what you should see happening. Right about the point where it starts hitting the walls here, a little bit less than that, and the text should change, and you can just go ahead and scroll back and forth. So here is the media query. Now, it used to be when we first started seeing media queries, people would use max widths instead. And that's because people, myself included, mistakenly at the time thought, oh, I need to design for the desktop, and then I will add media queries for smaller windows, smaller screens, smaller viewports, really. And eventually, this idea of mobile first started to float around, and we all jumped on it because it makes perfect sense. And that's, remember what we were saying last week, that a basic HTML page by default is mobile friendly. Before we add any CSS to it, it's a mobile friendly web page. Just by default, it works. So we should be using that as our baseline. We should be using that as our default CSS up here, and then doing media queries for wider screens in order to add layout as needed, and not like add the layout and then take it out again for the smaller screens. This way it makes so much more sense. If you ever take over someone's code base and you start seeing max widths for the media queries, well, I won't give you a blanket statement like always get it changed out, because sometimes it actually is useful. But almost always you're going to wind up using min widths like this instead, so you've got a mobile first approach. Okay, so I think we can take out this obnoxious guy here. Boom. And let's go ahead and start making Let's see, I gotta save that. Let's start fixing this guy right here. So we'll do the same media query, 600 pixels and wider, but we'll take this and we'll put it back upstairs here, and then we'll use Flexbox in order to spread it out horizontally along the top there.
Yep.
Just like people, but you guys have been wanting this from the beginning. Now we're finally going to do it.
Yeah, so I also added a order -1 in there. That way, so when it gets really, or order 1, is it? What? Huh? Nope, that didn't do it right.
I kind of already had it done, and instead of commenting it out, I switched it all up. So now I got to do it again.
Control Z, Control Z.
Oh, true. Very true.
Let's go ahead and do, let's see, where am I? Yeah, let's go ahead and do nav and footer. And it can't just be nav because we pushed both the nav and the footer down, right, with order 1. So let's do nav and footer, and we'll override what we did. And just within this media query, we'll do the order 0 again. So that's what will take it back to the way it was, the default. So I'll save this, and now it pushes that back upstairs. And once again, if you size this, if the browser allows you to, I'm sure I'm going to switch to Chrome after this. Yeah.
There we go.
That's the kind of stuff that we want to go on with. That's what this is useful for. So nav and footer order 0. Now let's go ahead and tackle those, the nav and the anchors. So nav, remember this, we did the display flex and flex direction column here in order to make those vertical. Now we want them horizontal. So let's change the flex direction and go with row instead. So we do not need to restate anything we've already stated here. So the nav has display flex on it here. And as long as we don't override that in the media query, it's still in effect. So all we have to do is override the stuff that we want to change, like flex direction column gets changed to flex direction row, which really, I guess this makes it part of the cascade here. There we go, flex direction row, downstairs and column, upstairs and row. Now we got to fix the padding here, so I think we can do, let's see, what did we put on there? Padding 0.5M and 3M. I think we just do 0.5M and 0M. Let's do nav A. Padding 0.5M like before for the top and bottom, but then 0 for left and right. And that'll take us back to here, which I know you guys hated. We're going to fix it. I have actually been to web pages where it looks like this. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah, so have I. Look for an email. Send them an email and ask them if they want to pay for a real website design.
Yeah, there you go. Use it as a business opportunity. Hey, your website sucks. Let me help.
Yep.
Okay, back up to the nav. This is going to be a property that we apply to the parent element, in this case nav. We're trying to space out the children, which are the anchors. So let's do a justify content. One of the properties in Flexbox that you'll wind up using a lot. And there are various things. You can go to the CSS tricks page in order to learn them all. Space around and space between are the two that I've used the most often. There's also flex start, flex end. There's a way to put them all in the middle and so on. Let's do, let's see, space around. That's spelled right. Justify content space around, and then, oh my.
Yeah, what a difference it made.
What a difference a single line of code makes. Now there's other ways you can get this done in CSS. You can do a display inline block and then use padding to space them out. You can float them. There's other things you can do, but this is just so much easier than any other technique that I know, with the possible exception of the grid, CSS grid. Okay, so they still have these, I don't know if you can see them or not, but they still got these little border top on there. If you're looking carefully, it's going to be irritating, so let's take that off of there. That is on the nav A plus A, where we have the border top. So let's do a nav A plus A. And I think this is the last thing we're going to do here. And we will do a border top, and to get rid of it, you just go ahead and do none. And there they go. And then sometimes you want like a border left, right? You want to have like a little pipe separator on these guys. So let's try that, see what it looks like. Border left, And then let's see, it was thin, solid, and then the RGB that I wound up using, I think was this dark one here. Let's try that. Okay, so yeah, it's touching the blocks of text here, but that's fixable with one more line of code. And the nav A up here, for all of them now, I'm just going to do a text align 0. So text align, just like centering something in a paragraph, but this time it's just being applied to the text of the anchor links. And okay, that did not work, so let's try something else. Make sure I spelled it right for once. I was expecting that to work. Let's do Flex 1. Wait a second. Huh. Text align 0. Oh, interesting. What am I doing wrong here? Let's take that off of there. Huh. Well, I was expecting that to work, folks. I knew the demo was going too well. Flex 1. So Flex, this is kind of a shorthand, just to explain what it is, at least. There's a Flex Grow and a Flex Shrink, and then a Flex Basis. And those are properties that we're going to explore on Friday when we do an actual layout for this for the desktop sizes. And you can put them all into Flex shorthand, kind of like putting all those font properties into a font property shorthand, so you don't have to do like font size and font style and font weight all separately. Flex is a shorthand for Flex Grow, Flex Shrink, and Flex Basis. There's no need to go into what those are just yet. We'll go into it on Friday. But I am surprised, actually. I was expecting this to work. Just for fun, let me try a different browser because I don't see anything wrong with my code. Let's try Firefox here. No, okay, I'm doing something wrong then. I'm just out of practice and not knowing what it is. But it's going to be some combination of stuff like this. Text align 0. I don't know why it's not working. Well, let's see. What if I take this guy off? Me. All right, well, I won't make you guys watch my fumbling around here. I'll send you guys on a break and stop the recording, and during the break I will figure out what the heck I'm doing wrong here, and then we'll get it fixed. Oh, text line 0. There it is. 0 is not a valid prop or value for text align. I typed in a couple of zeros in a row and I just put 0 here, so that's why it's not working. For text align, you can do left, justify, right, or center. So let's, instead of doing 0, which is not a valid value there, let's do text align center. Maybe that'll work instead. Haha, there we go. All right, I've just been staring at code too long today. Whew. Oh yeah, let me get the padding. Let me get the margin on this. I wanted to do that the whole time. I don't like how tight that is. That's just all the way up here. This has nothing to do with media query or Flexbox. It is block quote. I just want to put a margin on that. Even if it's just 1M top and bottom and then 0 left and right, just even something like that, it makes so much difference. You could even put 2 if you wanted to. So anyway, yeah, there we go. So here we are with the narrow size. We've got kind of a placeholder treatment for the nav, which would work, but isn't very satisfying. And then for, we'll call it tablet view, we have the navigation across the top there. Any questions about anything or any part of this code that you need to see again?
Yeah, my people
Yeah.
Sorry?
Go back down to media, please.
There it is. Now I bet we don't even need the Flex 1 now that I got the actual code in there for text to 1. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Oh, no, still needs it. So do I need that then? Yeah, I need both of them. Okay, I'm surprised. I thought I only needed one or the other. There we go. So what I don't need actually, if I've got both of these in place, I don't need the justify content. Those are enough to work on their own.
My season's guest speakers, for some reason, are now not stacked. They're floating next to each other.
Let's see. Do you have?
Oh, yeah, I'm done with that.
You got that in there?
Figure?
Yeah, I know. I'm good with media. So.
Oh, so yeah, but just down here. Okay, let me go ahead and stop the recording, and then you can share your screen and we'll take a look at it.
Yep.